Rick cleared his throat. Honey, maybe we could just talk to Tom again. Neighbor to neighbor. I tried that approach this morning. Mr. Henderson made it clear that he has no intention of respecting either our authority or our community standards. Drastic situations required decisive action. Mrs. Pemberton, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. What exactly are you proposing, dear? Karen smiled for the first time all day. I'm proposing we remind the Henderson family and everyone else in this neighborhood exactly why we have rules in the first place. She opened her laptop and pulled up a satellite view of the Henderson property. The pool is positioned approximately 18 inches from the rear property line. According to city code, that puts it in violation of setback requirements. More importantly, their landscaping doesn't include proper drainage, which means pool overflow could damage neighboring properties. Your property, Dave said quietly. My property, Karen confirmed, which gives me legal standing to pursue immediate remediation. The vote was 3-2, with Sarah and Dave dissenting. But it was enough. Karen had her mandate. As the board members filed out, Rick lingered behind. Karen, I love you, but sometimes I think you care more about being right than being happy. She looked at him through the bay window, where the Henderson pool glowed softly under their new solar lights. Someone has to care about maintaining standards, Rick. If that makes me the villain in everyone else's story, so be it. But as she watched Tom Henderson helping his daughter out of the pool, wrapping her in a towel and carrying her inside, something twisted uncomfortably in her chest. She pushed the feeling down and returned to her dossier. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Karen stood in her backyard at 6:47 a.m., wearing rubber boots and her most determined expression. In her hands, she held a garden hose and what could only be described as a tactical leaf blower. Behind her, arranged with military precision, was 17 bags of leaves she'd collected from various neighborhood yards over the past week, along with 3 wheelbarrows full of dirt from her own landscaping project. This was war, and Karen Middleton had never lost a war. The Henderson pool sparkled innocently 20 feet away, its crystal-clear water reflecting the morning sky. Tom had spent an hour yesterday skimming leaves and checking the chemical balance. She'd watched him through her kitchen window, noting his methodical approach, his obvious pride in maintaining the pool for his children, which made what she was about to do feel almost wrong. Karen shook her head, dispelling the moment of doubt. Tom had forced her hand. When city code enforcement had visited yesterday and found nothing actionable, the pool was apparently just within legal setback requirements, and the inspector had dismissed her drainage concerns as hypothetical. She'd realized that official channels weren't going to solve this problem. Sometimes, a homeowner had to take matters into her own hands. She started with the leaves. Bag after bag of oak, maple, and elm debris sailed over the fence, landing in the pristine water with satisfying splashes. The automatic pool skimmer began working overtime, but it was no match for the sheer volume of organic matter Karen was introducing to the Hendersons' aquatic paradise. Next came the dirt. This required more strategic thinking. Karen had researched optimal dispersal patterns online, studying everything from sediment distribution to erosion patterns. She wasn't just dumping dirt randomly. She was creating maximum cleanup difficulty while maintaining plausible deniability. What the hell are you doing? Karen spun around to find Tom Henderson standing at his back door, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. His expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, nuclear-grade fury. Good morning, Tom. Karen called out pleasantly, not pausing in her leaf distribution. Lovely day for yard work, isn't it? You're putting leaves in my pool. I'm disposing of organic yard waste on my own property. If some of that waste happens to blow over the fence due to natural wind patterns, well, she shrugged. That's just nature. Tom set down his coffee mug with deliberate control. Karen, I'm going to give you exactly 10 seconds to stop whatever this is before I call the police. And tell them what? That your neighbor is doing landscaping in her own backyard. Karen's voice maintained its cheerful tone, even as she dumped another wheelbarrow of dirt. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear about your unpermitted pool installation, though. That's when Tom Henderson did something Karen hadn't expected. He laughed. Not a happy laugh. A dark, exhausted laugh that made her pause mid-shovel. You know what, Karen? You win. You want to play games? Let's play games. He disappeared into his house. Karen continued her work, but something about his tone made her uneasy. She'd expected anger, threats, maybe even tears. Laughter suggested a level of calculation she hadn't anticipated from the mild-mannered software engineer. 20 minutes later, as Karen was putting the finishing touches on her masterpiece, the Henderson pool now resembled a murky pond more than a recreational facility. Tom reappeared. This time, he was fully dressed and carrying his phone. Karen's home office looked like a legal battlefield. HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and property codes covered every surface, highlighted and cross-referenced with the precision of a military strategist. She'd been at it for 6 hours straight, surviving on nothing but coffee and righteous indignation. Found you, she whispered, stabbing her finger at a particularly dense paragraph of municipal code. Section 12.4b. Temporary structures requiring drainage permits for installations exceeding 1,000 gallons. Her phone rang. Karen Middleton, HOA President. Mrs. Middleton. This is Janet from City Code Enforcement. We received your complaint about an unpermitted pool installation. That's correct. The property owners have refused to comply with community guidelines and are in clear violation of multiple city ordinances. I'm emailing you the documentation now. Well, I have to tell you, we're pretty backed up. Earliest we could get someone out there would be next Thursday. Next Thursday? Karen closed her eyes, calculating. That was 6 days of the Henderson children gleefully violating every principle she'd spent years establishing. 6 days of other neighbors seeing that rules were optional, that authority was negotiable. That's unacceptable, Karen said. This is a matter of community safety and property values. Surely there's an expedited process. Ma'am, unless it's an emergency. It is an emergency. Standing water creates mosquito breeding grounds, poses drowning risks to neighborhood children, and violates multiple aesthetic covenants that protect our property values. There was a long pause. I'll see what I can do. After hanging up, Karen poured herself another cup of coffee and returned to her research. By evening, she'd compiled a 17-page dossier documenting every possible violation, complete with photographs, property surveys, and a detailed timeline of the Henderson family's pattern of non-compliance, which included their Christmas lights staying up until January 3rd last year and their garbage cans being visible from the street on non-collection days. The board meeting that night was held in Karen's living room, as usual. The other 4 members, Rick, elderly Mrs. Pemberton, nervous accountant Dave Chen, and newcomer Sarah Mitchell, sat arranged around her coffee table like a tribunal. The Henderson situation has escalated beyond a simple compliance issue, Karen began, distributing copies of her dossier. This represents a fundamental challenge to the authority and effectiveness of this board. Dave flipped through the pages, his eyebrows climbing higher with each section. Karen, this is comprehensive. But don't you think we might be overreacting a bit? It's just a pool. It's never just about the pool, Dave. It's about precedent. If we allow one family to flagrantly disregard our guidelines, what message does that send to the other 63 households in this community? Sarah, who'd only joined the board 3 months ago, raised her hand tentatively. Maybe we could work out a compromise, like a retroactive approval process. The room went quiet. Karen turned to Sarah with the same expression she might reserve for someone suggesting they paint the clubhouse hot pink. Sarah, I appreciate that you're new here, but compromise is what led to the great mailbox crisis of 2019. One family painted their mailbox navy blue instead of the approved forest green. We compromised, and within 6 months, we had 17 different mailbox colors. It took me 2 years to restore uniformity. Karen Middleton stood in her pristine kitchen, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Through her spotless bay window, she could see it, the monstrosity that had appeared overnight in the Hendersons' backyard, like some aquatic alien invasion. A pool, she whispered, her voice trembling with the kind of outrage usually reserved for discovering someone had put pineapple on pizza. They installed a pool without HOA approval. The sparkling blue water caught the morning sunlight, practically mocking her as it reflected cheerful ripples across the fence that separated their properties. Karen had spent 3 years fighting to get the Henderson family to trim the hedge exactly 2 inches shorter. 3 years. And now they had the audacity to install a 12-foot above-ground pool without so much as a courtesy notification to the homeowners association, her association, the one she'd spent the last 5 years molding into a fortress of neighborhood perfection. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband. Board meeting moved to 7 p.m. tonight. Can you handle the Henderson situation diplomatically? Diplomatically. Karen almost laughed. Rick still didn't understand that diplomacy was what had gotten their neighborhood into this mess in the first place. Someone had to maintain standards, and if that someone happened to be her, so be it. She marched outside, her sensible flats clicking against the concrete with military precision. The Hendersons' backyard was a war zone of cardboard boxes, plastic wrapping, and, worst of all, happiness. She could hear splashing and laughter from behind the fence, the sound of children enjoying themselves without a care in the world for property values or community guidelines. "Excuse me," Karen called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had single-handedly gotten 17 different holiday decorations banned from front yards. "I need to speak with the homeowner immediately." The splashing stopped. After a moment, Tom Henderson's head appeared over the fence, water dripping from his graying beard. His expression shifted from friendly curiosity to resigned recognition in the span of 2 seconds. "Morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it? Mr. Henderson, I'm here in my official capacity as HOA president. That pool is a clear violation of Section 4.7 of our community guidelines, which explicitly states that any outdoor recreational installations exceeding 6 feet in diameter require board approval and a permit from." "Karen," Tom interrupted, his voice tired but patient. "My kids are 8 and 10. They've been asking for a pool for 3 summers. We saved up, we bought it, we installed it. It's in our backyard. It doesn't block anyone's view, and it makes my family happy." The word happy hit Karen like a physical blow. Happy was dangerous. Happy led to noise complaints, property damage, and worst of all, precedent. If the Hendersons could install a pool without approval, what was next? Trampolines? Hot tubs? Gazebos? "Mr. Henderson, I'm going to have to ask you to drain that pool immediately. If you fail to comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter to the City Code Enforcement Office." Tom's expression hardened. "You know what, Karen? Go ahead and escalate. But until someone with actual legal authority tells me otherwise, my kids are going to enjoy their pool." He disappeared behind the fence, leaving Karen standing alone in her yard, fury building in her chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about respect, authority, and the very fabric of civilized society. As she stalked back toward her house, a plan began forming in her mind, a plan that would teach Tom Henderson and everyone else in Maple Grove Estates exactly what happened when you challenged Karen Middleton's authority. The pool sparkled innocently in the afternoon sun, completely unaware that it had just started a war. Karen sat in her kitchen at 2:47 p.m., still wearing her dirty boots, watching through the bay window as police officers took photographs of the Henderson pool. One officer was interviewing Tom, who gestured calmly toward her yard while explaining something that made the officer nod and scribble notes. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past hour. 12 missed calls from Rick, 7 from various board members, and a growing string of text messages from neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. The word was spreading through Maple Grove Estates like wildfire. HOA President Karen Middleton had declared war on a family pool. The doorbell rang. Karen opened the door to find Officer Martinez, a tired-looking woman in her 40s who seemed distinctly unimpressed with suburban drama. "Mrs. Middleton, I'm here about the complaint filed by your neighbor. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" 20 minutes later, Karen found herself explaining her actions to someone who clearly thought the entire situation was ridiculous. Officer Martinez listened with professional patience as Karen outlined the HOA violations, the community standards, the importance of maintaining property values. "Ma'am," the officer finally interrupted, "did you or did you not deliberately throw debris into your neighbor's pool?" Karen straightened her shoulders. "I was disposing of yard waste on my own property. If natural wind patterns cause some of that waste too." "Mrs. Middleton," Officer Martinez's tone suggested she'd dealt with this exact type of semantic dodge before. "There's no wind strong enough to carry 17 bags of leaves and 3 wheelbarrows of dirt over a 6-foot fence. What you did was property damage, and frankly, it's harassment." "Harassment? I'm trying to maintain community standards. That pool is legal. I checked with code enforcement myself. The pool is properly positioned, properly installed, and doesn't violate any city ordinances." Officer Martinez closed her notepad. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay for professional pool cleaning and any damage to their filtration system. And if there are any more incidents, Mr. Henderson will be within his rights to file formal charges." After the officer left, Karen sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the business card for AquaClean Pool Services, emergency cleaning, $400 minimum. $400 to undo 30 minutes of work. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone rang. "Rick." "Karen, what the hell happened today?" She found herself explaining everything: the research, the early morning mission, the police visit. With each detail, Rick's silences grew longer. "Honey," he said finally, "I think you need to step back from the HOA for a while." "Step back? Rick, I spent 5 years building this community into what? A place where neighbors call the police on each other over pools. Where people are afraid to decorate for holidays or plant flowers without checking 17 different guidelines first." Karen felt something crack inside her chest. "I was protecting our investment, our home values, our way of life." "Whose way of life, Karen?" "Because I've been talking to the neighbors while you've been waging war, and nobody else seems to want the kind of protection you're offering." That evening, Karen found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She walked around the neighborhood without her clipboard, her measuring tape, or her camera. She just walked. At the corner of Maple and Grove, she passed the Johnson house, where their 8-year-old daughter was drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk, a clear violation of community aesthetic standards. Karen opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. 2 streets over, she noticed that the Williams family had installed window boxes without HOA approval. The flowers were beautiful, bright red geraniums that made their whole house look more welcoming. When Karen had first noticed them 3 weeks ago, she'd made a note to send a violation letter. She'd never gotten around to it. On her way back home, she stopped in front of the Henderson house. Through their back fence, she could see Tom with a long-handled net, patiently skimming the last of the leaves from his pool. His daughter sat on the edge, her feet dangling in the water, chattering about something that made him laugh. "Mrs. Middleton?" Karen turned to find Jenny Henderson approaching from the sidewalk, her expression cautious but not hostile. "I sent you a text earlier about talking," Jenny said. "I meant it. This situation has gotten out of hand, but I don't think either of our families wants it to end with lawyers and police reports." Karen looked at this woman she'd spent months thinking of as her adversary. Jenny was younger than her, probably in her early 30s, with the tired eyes of a working mother and paint stains on her jeans that suggested she'd been helping with afternoon art projects. "I don't know how to back down from this," Karen admitted, the words surprising her as much as they seemed to surprise Jenny. "Maybe we start with cleaning the pool together," Jenny said softly, "and then we figure out how to be neighbors instead of enemies." Karen looked back at her own house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and regulation-approved flower beds. It looked exactly like every other house on the street, which had always been the point. But standing here now, she couldn't remember why that had mattered so much. "I'll pay for the professional cleaning," she said finally. "We'll split it," Jenny replied. "And maybe after that, you could come over for dinner. Tom makes an amazing lasagna, and I think it's time our kids actually met the famous Mrs. Middleton." As Karen walked back to her house, she realized that for the first time in years, she was genuinely curious about what would happen next. The pool sparkled behind her, finally clean again, and the Henderson children's laughter carried on the evening air. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Mitchell. Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. We need to talk about leadership changes. Karen stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Tomorrow's battles could wait. Tonight, she had a dinner invitation to consider and a very different kind of neighborhood to imagine. The war was over, but the peace was just beginning. Karen Middleton of 847 Maple Grove Lane, he said into the phone, his voice loud enough for her to hear every word. Yes, I'd like to report malicious property damage and harassment by a neighbor. She's deliberately contaminated my pool with debris and dirt from her own yard. Karen felt her first real stab of concern. It's not property damage if it's removable. Tom held up a finger, still speaking into the phone. No, officer, this isn't the first incident. I have documentation of ongoing harassment, including multiple frivolous complaints to city offices, intimidation tactics at HOA meetings, and now this deliberate sabotage. Documentation. The word hit Karen like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on building her case against the Hendersons that she'd never considered they might be building one against her. I'll be here waiting, Tom said, ending the call. He looked directly at Karen, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. Tom, let's be reasonable about this, she began, but he was already walking back toward his house. The police will be here in 20 minutes, he called over his shoulder. You might want to use that time to think about whether this was really worth it. Karen stood alone in her backyard, surrounded by empty leaf bags and dirty wheelbarrows, staring at the ruined pool. For the first time in years, she genuinely didn't know what to do next. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Heard from Dave that neighbors are talking about calling an emergency board meeting to discuss your methods. Maybe we should talk when I get home from work. Then another text, this one from Sarah Mitchell. Karen, I don't know what you did, but Mrs. Patterson saw police cars on Maple Grove Lane. People are asking questions. And finally, a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Jenny Henderson, Tom's wife. We need to talk, all of us, before this gets any worse. Karen looked at the pool one more time. The dirt was already settling to the bottom, creating ugly brown clouds in the water. It would take hours to clean, maybe days to get the water crystal clear again. She'd won this battle, but looking at her phone buzzing with increasingly urgent messages, she was beginning to suspect she might have just lost the war.